moved by mercy. We're going on to the next beatitude where Jesus says this, blessed are the merciful, for they shall what? Receive mercy. Thank God for mercy. You and I would be burning in hell if it were not for God's mercy. Undeserved. You can't buy it, but God so freely gives it. And I love the way the Psalms express it. The Psalms call it His tender mercies. God has a tender heart. And when you hurt, He hurts. And He's moved with compassion to meet your need. That word merciful, just for some definitions here. First of all, obviously, it means to help the afflicted. You give to the afflicted what they need to alleviate their suffering. A lot of people are suffering. And sadly, a lot of people are suffering in wounds and scars that you can't see on the outside. They're deep within. They need a friend. They need someone to talk to. They need someone to give them hope. They need someone to give them some joy. They need someone to distract them from their own horror story of a life. And you and I can be that. We can be the salt of the earth. We can be the light set on a hill. I like this next definition from Strong's Concordance, actively compassionate. We're going to talk about that here in a moment, but mercy is always active. You know, you don't secretly in your heart feel sorry for someone without doing something. Mercy is that quality of heart to where you are compelled to act. You can't just pass this by without doing or saying something. And so compassion is always active. And then this last definition from Thayer's, we're going to talk about this pretty much in detail here in a moment. But mercy is to feel sympathy with the misery of another. And you guys are fantastic at this. I mean, we could go around the room and say what every person here and every person on Skype has done to minister and to be of service to other people, whether they be saved or not. But, you know, sometimes, you know, Terry and I lately, you know, if we're trying to relax and watch some TV, we've started to watch those, you know, those veterinary shows, right? Do you all see them? That's a great show, Paul. Oh. So you do learn a lot. It's like watching those homesteading programs or watching those flip reality shows. You learn a lot of neat tricks and great things. You should listen. You should watch with your wife, Paul. Those are great shows about the vets and the animals. But the problem, so do you like Dr. Jeff in Colorado, or do you like Dr. Pole in, where is he? Yeah. Yeah, the critter fixers. That's the newest on the scene. They're a hoot, aren't they? But anyway, let's try to get back on track here. You know, so Terry and I start watching these things, and the next thing I know, Terry's crying, and I'm crying, and it's this little dog or cat or whatever. Last night they had actually a hedgehog. Was it a hedgehog? Hedgehog on there. Have you all ever seen a hedgehog? Those are the cutest things. I mean, what a great pet. And
the next thing is Bailey is sitting up on my lap,
yeah,
watching intently.
Our little Shih Tzu loves the vet shows. He will sit there and watch because, you know, of course you get cats meowing and dogs barking, and that perks their ears right up. They love watching that stuff. But talking about mercy, you know, even when you see an animal suffering, it touches your heart. there's something that goes off in your heart to where you hurt for them. And that's what this last definition from Thayer's is talking about, to where you actually suffer with the pain that they're suffering with. And that is what moves you and compels you to do something. Now, sad to say, dear God, people are cruel today. In this age and in this world system, they are cruel. Just absolute no feeling, no pity, no compassion, no sympathy. I don't know how you can get a heart that is that hard as a rock. It's got to be sin. It's got to be Satan's domain and Satan's blindness. But let's go through some points about mercy. I want you to see how Jesus prioritizes mercy. Because mercy is not a nice to have. Mercy is a requirement for the believer. We must be involved in each other's lives, reaching not only into the church, but into the world to help, to be of service to people. And so I want to start off here in this passage from Matthew 25. But I don't feel like I can go any further without explaining something about Matthew 25, specifically Matthew 24 and 25. Let me just read this directly. In Matthew 25, 31 through 46, Jesus describes what is called by Dr. Dwight Pentecost the judgment on the Gentiles. Tim LaHaye calls it the judgment of the nations. There are many judgments in the Bible, a lot of judgments throughout the Old Testament. You had Nineveh, you have Babylon, you have the other nations that were judged of God. Even his own nation, Israel, was judged for their idolatry. And in the Old Testament, in the end times, there are several judgments. A lot of Christians don't realize that. They think at the end of all things there's going to be this one big judgment, day of judgment, and then it will be over with, and that's not the case. We talked several months ago when we were talking about end times, we talked about the Bema judgment, or the judgment seat of Christ, and that judgment is for believers who are raptured with the church. And then there's the great white throne judgment, which takes place at the very end of all times when Satan, the Antichrist, the evil heathens at that time are cast into the lake of fire. So you have that judgment. There's another judgment within the tribulation period. And we were, after a while, I felt like we should move on because when you get kind of in the end times, it can go on and on forever. It's a huge subject. We're about to go into that subject on Thursday nights on heaven, and I'm completely looking forward to it. Paul and I were talking about it Thursday night, and I would be thrilled if on Thursday nights we were talking about heaven and kept talking about heaven until we get to heaven. There's a lot to talk about, and it's going to be a great time. But here, Tim LaHaye calls it the judgment of the nations, and I want you to see when it occurs. It occurs after the tribulation, but before Christ's millennial reign. And so what happens? At the end of the tribulation, we have the Battle of Armageddon, where the nations rise up together to try to defeat God. They are the ones that end up being defeated. But remember, Jesus and all of his saints come back with him at that time for this great battle of Armageddon. And so Jesus wins, and immediately after that win, there is this judgment. Because what happens next? The millennial reign. And so, as things transition into the millennial reign, the Jews and the Christians who survived the tribulation will be ushered into the millennial reign. And at that point, the wicked who are still alive. Now, by that time, the population of the earth has really decreased. The Christians are gone because they have been raptured. The Battle of Armageddon, my gosh, who knows how many millions will be slaughtered in that battle. And so there's a great reduction of humanity still left on earth, but those who survive the tribulation, but still are rebels in their heart towards God, they will be judged in this time of the judgment of the Gentiles or the judgment of the nations. They will be judged and condemned to hell at that time. And so when Jesus starts his millennial reign, we're all Christians. We're all believers. And so when he talks here in Matthew 25, he's talking about that judgment right before his millennial reign. And some people don't understand that, but as we read this, don't start to think, well, this is for a judgment that I won't even be there for. I'll be in heaven, or I'll be with Jesus to start the millennial reign. Not really sure how all the logistics work out, but so why do I even care about this? Well, it's just like any prophecy. Though biblical prophecy speaks to specific times and events, the basis of those judgments are timeless and universal. So like if we're studying, when Jonah was sent to Nineveh, well, what do we care? That was how many thousands of years ago. Who cares about Nineveh? Well, yes, Jonah went and prophesied to these people, but there's a lot that we can learn from that judgment, because the basis for the judgment is the same from judgment to judgment, right? And the same thing with this judgment. What does God give priority to? And as we're reading through this, I would like you to ask yourself, am I giving the priority to mercy that I should be giving? Am I giving mercy in my life the same priority that Jesus gives it, that he will give in this coming judgment? Matthew 25, verse 31, when the Son of Man comes in his glory, so he's talking here about having just won the battle of Armageddon. He's now establishing his kingdom, his rule upon the earth. When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, all those that are left after the tribulation. And he will separate people one from another as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. I was reading in a commentary that last night or this morning that, during the day, many times the sheep and the goats would kind of mingle together. But then at night, a shepherd would have to go through and separate the goats because the goats were evidently more sensitive to the cool air. And so they needed to be herded together to keep their body heat in. But the sheep, I guess all that wool, right? They could tolerate cold much better. And so he's talking to them about something that they know very well. Verse 33, and he will place the sheep on his right and the goats on the left. Then the king will say to those on his right, Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. So the goats on his right are those that are going to be with him in his kingdom. Those are the ones that he is pleased with. Those are the ones he accepts. Why? What was the basis of judgment? For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. Now think about this. At a time where he is separating the sheep from the goats, what is the defining measure of whether you're a sheep or a goat? How you treated other people. That speaks volumes, doesn't it? And it's not just how you treat other people and the fact that maybe you were polite and courteous. It was the fact that you actually did something about their needs. You became involved in their needs, in their pain. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him and say, Lord, when did we see you hungry or feed you? When did we see you thirsty or give you drink? That just tells you something right there. The righteous were ministering and serving others in this way because they were moved by these people's needs. They were touched in their heart. They weren't doing it for any reward. They were doing it because there was a need and they could help alleviate the suffering. When did we see you a stranger? When did we see you naked? When did we see you sick or in prison? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my, what? Brothers. This kind of defines how we know when this judgment will take place. When Jesus says, because you've done it to one of the least of these my brothers, he's talking about you've done it to one of the least of these my Jewish brethren. Because remember, the tribulation is really all about Israel. And Israel being cleansed, and Israel being chastened, and Israel being restored. And so the question is, how did these saints who survived the tribulation, how did they treat the Jews, is really what it comes down to. And Jesus says, because you've done it to one of the least of these my fellow Jews, you did it to me. You think about that for a few moments, that really causes you to take notice, wow, Jews really are precious to God. They really are His chosen people. They have a place, a special place in His heart. Then He will say to those on His left, the goats, depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty and you didn't give me anything to drink. I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. Naked, you did not clothe me. Sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. I was over at Mary's house one day this past week, and we got to talking. And I didn't realize, well, I've realized it more and more as I've gotten to know her and Don better. But they were so involved in ministry. Up in the Manor Care Nursing Home, where my mom spent the last year of her life and passed away there, they had a Bible study there, a church service every Wednesday night for those people. And she was, she brought up about how she would love to have a Bible study there in her house. And, if I wasn't working full time, I would love to be doing that. I would love, a lunchtime Bible study, gather some senior citizens that need some love and some care and looking after. I think that would just be a wonderful thing. I would love to do much more of that. But the job kind of gets in the way. But we do as much of it as we can, and it's really you all doing it. He says, I was a stranger and you did not welcome me. I was naked, I was sick, in prison, you did not visit me. This is the criteria for this judgment, which tells you what? What it tells you is that Christians feed the hungry. Christians give drink to the thirsty. Christians reach out and welcome the stranger. Christians clothe the naked. Christians visit the sick and the prisoners. And that's the criteria for this judgment. And if you don't do these things of mercy, then you will be damned to hell with the goats. Because obviously you're not a Christian. Do you see the foundational assumption that God is working off here? And so basically, what this parable, some call it a parable, what this parable is saying here is that you're not a Christian if you're not doing these things, because everybody knows, obviously, a Christian would be serving in this way, because this is what a Christian is. Now, like I've said before, I'm preaching to the choir here. We could go around the room and I know of many ways in which you all are reaching out to people in the community. And you all have been so faithful here in the church to minister to our congregants. And the prayer every Sunday night is just one more piece of evidence to that fact. And so these guys had the same question. Well, when did we see you hungry or in prison? Why are you getting after us, Lord? And Jesus responds and says, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these, my Jewish brethren and sisters, you did not do it to me. And those are the ones that are judged as goats. Now, if that is the basis of this judgment here, and by the way, we are not saved by works. Okay, I don't want to get off into that because that's a huge distraction. But again, it's this tension that we're not saved by works, but without works you cannot be saved. It's that thing happening here. Do you see the priority of this judgment? Isn't it amazing when you stop to think about it? And so we get so wrapped up in this world, especially if you have a full-time job where you're running to and fro in a frantic, sometimes panicked level, we completely lose sight of the needs that are around us. And I dare say we cannot let that happen. Do we place the priority and the importance on showing mercy to those in need that Jesus did, that Jesus does? And if we are placing the priority on serving others and showing mercy to others, if we do prioritize it to the same degree that Jesus does, are we looking for opportunities to serve more? Now, you can serve too much. You do need to care for your own soul. And I would dare say that probably most, if not all of you who are serving in these different ways, you're probably at capacity and maybe you can't do anymore. Again, I'm speaking to the choir here. But mercy has got to be a part of our everyday life. The next statement, mercy feels the needs and the suffering of others. Being moved with compassion means you have the spiritual faculties to discern and feel someone else's pain. Do you have that? It only comes by a born-again, regenerated heart. People in this world that do not know Jesus, they are without feeling. They have what Paul describes, they have no natural affection. They're hard-hearted, they're cold, they're indifferent. They even demean other people that have needs in their lives. But the Christian, not so. Mark chapter 1, verse 40, and a man with leprosy came to Jesus, imploring him and kneeling down and saying to him, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And look at verse 41. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him and said to him, I am willing, be cleansed. That was the verse that I put up on the screen for this morning. Moved with compassion, Jesus reached out his hand and touched him. When that compassion stirs in your heart, you can't do anything else. You can't help but reach out and touch the need. Moved with compassion, it means to have the bowels yearn. Not in the way you're thinking. To have the bowels moved. Not in the way you're thinking. Although that can bring great joy to your heart when it happens, right? It's amazing how, as you get older, simple things become more important. right? But when it says here to have the bowels yearn and move, it's talking about this is something that comes from deep inside of you. I've listened to you. I've watched you around other people, and I'm saying all of you. I mean, if I started naming names, I could go down the whole list, but I don't dare do that. I'll mention one name. I think a lot of Lisa and Dana. And the whole reason that they are where they are in the country is because they were moved with compassion for the neighbors around them. And they're conducting 3 Bible studies a week, and they're reaching out. I would be shocked to hear that anybody ever came to their home that did not hear about Jesus. They're always sharing Jesus with people. And it's just because after you have received the inexpressible love of God and forgiveness for yourself, you can't help but give it to someone else. You can't help but give it away. It's just a joy that overflows towards other people. We see this in the life of Jesus, Hebrews chapter 4, verse 14. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our confession. We confess that our God will save us. We confess that our God has a perfect plan for our lives. We confess that when I'm in trouble, God is a very present help in that time of trouble. We hold fast and we are confident in that confession of our faith. Why? Because we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses. Sympathize, sympatheo, I don't know if that's the way that it's pronounced, but it sounds good, comes from 2 words. Sim, which means some or with, along with, and then patheo, to feel pity for, to feel sympathy for. So it means not only are you feeling sympathetic, but you are actually in that sympathy identifying with the pain and the suffering that that person is enduring. It means to be affected with the same feeling, to feel sympathy with. And the book of Hebrews makes the high priesthood of Jesus a big deal because Jesus didn't sit in heaven speculating about what you were going through. Jesus came to the earth. He partook of flesh. He was tempted in every way like as you and I. He was beaten. He was executed. He was persecuted. He was hated. He knows all about temptation. He's experienced it personally. God sent a man, his son, called Jesus, to become our high priest who would experience everything that we have. Why? So that he could be moved, so that the Godhead could understand what we go through. There's so many things in our life that God does not condone, but he does understand. And that's why he's merciful. And that's why he doesn't deal with us according to our sins, Psalm says, because he knows that we are but dust. So we have a high priest who can sympathize with our weaknesses. He feels the pain. He feels the suffering. When you hurt, it's very true that he hurts as well. And he doesn't just sit there feeling sorry for you. He's praying for you without ceasing, interceding for you without ceasing. That's why our prayers and intercessions on Sunday night, I mean, can you do more for somebody than that? Sure, you could give your life. You could give them money. You could be there to physically help them in some way. But don't you even for 1 second even dare to minimize the power and the effects of your prayers for them. Praying for them is number 1. That's the best thing you could be doing for them. We have a high priest who feels the pain of our weaknesses. And because of that, verse 16 says, let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. And when we draw near to that throne of grace, we have 100% confidence that Jesus will be there and meet our need. He may not give us what we're asking for, but He always meets the need. For a long time, I was praying that God would somehow give me another job. And when we went through that one interview and that didn't pan out, and so here I am still in the same job. But the job has gotten much easier. Not because the job has changed, but because I have changed. And God is teaching me the right way to deal with stress and with all of the busyness of the world, the nonsense of the world. And so the job is still just as busy, just as demanding, but I'm doing much better because God left me there in it, and I'm learning how to think differently and handle things differently. And so that's why I say every time you go to the throne of grace, your need will be answered. It may be changing you instead of changing the circumstances, but every time you go to God, He will minister to your need, whatever it is. It's a great God, isn't He? Mercy is participating in another's suffering, even sacrificially. There's a lot of people. I've heard it said many times around work. We used to have one gentleman in our church that believed this. That, the more good deeds I do, if my good outnumbers my bad, then God might consider me for heaven. Which is completely a works mentality, which is not right. You won't get to heaven that way. And I seriously doubt that your good outnumbers your bad. I think we all know the score on that one, right? Through personal experience. And so a lot of people do good things out of a sense of obligation or duty or guilt. That's the wrong motivation for mercy. Mercy is the voluntary, eager, and active participation in the suffering of another for the purpose of alleviating their suffering. That's one of the hardest things about the caregiver, isn't it? You wish you could take the pain and bear it for them, but you can't. You wish you could take the problem away, but you can't. You pray for healing, and healing is either still on its way, it's not the right time yet, or God is working out other things in the way He's answering your prayers. It's hard to sit with someone suffering hour after hour, day after day. But God will give you the grace. And what I mean by it's hard because you just want to fix it. You feel so bad for them, you just want to fix it, and you can't. And so one of the most important things in being a caretaker is realizing, I can't fix this, but I sure can be there to talk with them, to cry with them, to pray with them, to help them into the bathroom, to feed them, to do whatever is necessary. I can certainly be there for them. You're participating in their suffering. You're not allowing them to suffer alone. It doesn't mean that you're there 24/7 with them. You've got to fit things into your family life and the priorities of your life. Everybody understands that. But you've got to do something. You've got to be participating in their suffering somehow. Remember the story of the Good Samaritan? Luke chapter 10, verse 30, Jesus replied, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers. He's probably in D.C. or Baltimore. Did you hear about that poor NASCAR driver stabbed in the chest in California? And it was like, I think they said 5:40 in the afternoon, still daylight. What in God's name is going on in our nation? It's just, and then they just came out with, on a per capita basis, Baltimore has twice the violent crime that Chicago has. I didn't know anybody could beat Chicago. But per capita, the violent crime in Baltimore is off the charts. And this is what they dealt with. They dealt with very much the same thing, traveling on the roadways and the highways. Well, what they call highways, the highways and the byways. It was really a dirt path, but it was very dangerous to travel. They didn't have policemen around every corner. They didn't even have policemen. He fell among robbers who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now, by chance, a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. Thanks a lot, buddy. You're supposed to be representing God. And so likewise, a Levite, another of God's representatives, when he came to the place and saw him, pass by on the other side. You remember why Jesus is telling this story? Because one of the Jewish lawyers asked him a question trying to trick him. You know how proud and arrogant the Jewish lawyers and Pharisees were? And in Jesus' story here, he just happens to make a Samaritan the hero of the day. And the Jews hated the Samaritans. I mean, if they saw a Samaritan walking down the street, the Jew would walk on the other side of the street, just so, keep a distance. They hated the Samaritans. And so Jesus in verse 33 says, but a Samaritan. That lawyer was probably hot under the collar. How dare you elevate a dog? See, Samaritans were half Jews. They were considered half-breeds. Jews called Samaritans dogs. How dare you exalt a dog above me? A lawyer of the Jews. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had what? He had compassion. He had mercy. And he went to him and bound up his wounds, and pouring on oil and wine. Then he set him on his own animal, brought him to an inn, and took care of him. You think about that every now and then when you hear of some of these cases, where someone picks up someone who's just bloody and half dead, and they put him in their car, and blood's getting everywhere, right? He's going to clean this up. But the hero that gave them aid, that never crossed their mind. All they were concerned about was getting this person help. Very small detail, but I'm just pointing it out. When it says that he set him on his own animal, he was putting his own life on the line here. He was taking responsibility for this life, and he brought him to an inn, and he took care of him. And the next day, he took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back. The Good Samaritan simply could not let it go. There was a need, and he had to do something. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the one who fell among the robbers? They said, well, the one who showed him mercy. And Jesus said, you go and do likewise. Needs are all around us. There's so many needs, there's no way we could ever minister to all of them. But God will have people cross your path, and He will touch your heart. And He has put you in a community full of needs, and He wants you to respond. Mercy is the voluntary, eager, not reluctant, eager and active participation in someone else's suffering. I'm skipping over some of this. It's in your notes. But remember this, mercy requires nothing before it's given. Freely you have received, what did Jesus say to do? Freely give. And so the person doesn't have to be better, act better. The person doesn't have to clean up who they are. This story in Luke 23, when Jesus was hanging on the cross, is so relevant. Verse 39, one of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." So he was mocking Jesus, but the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same sentence of condemnation? We indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward of our deeds, but this man has done nothing wrong." We don't know for sure, but based upon the fact that, back then they didn't arrest someone and then let them sit in jail for 3 years before they did something about it, like we do. This man obviously had just recently committed crime. They were crucifying him. It was more than likely a repeated pattern, not the first offense. Because to end up on the cross, your crimes had to be pretty horrific or repetitive. But this man, Jesus, has done nothing wrong. And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." This passage is why I've always said I believe in deathbed conversions. I believe in conversions even in the moment of suicide. If at the last minute that person cries out to Jesus, and he cries out with a heart of repentance and acknowledgement of who Jesus is, there's not a single human being can say that person ended up in hell or that person was not saved there in the end. This man dying on the cross, he had done nothing. I mean, we probably could say he had done nothing right in his whole life. Whatever was the last crime he committed, he didn't have time to go back and make retribution and make it right. He was caught in a crime, he was imprisoned, and now he's hanging on a cross. What could he have possibly have done to warrant paradise? Nothing. And yet, here, forgiveness and mercy was freely given based upon his recognition of who Jesus was. I believe in foxhole conversions. I believe in deathbed conversions. I believe that in those last few breaths that you take, Jesus is reaching out to you and you can be saved. And I think this is a prime example. When we talk about heaven, Paul is preparing the lessons from a book called A Place Called Heaven by Dr. Robert Jeffries. Fantastic book. But I put this quote in there just to whet your appetite a little bit. He says, "If you wait until the moment you die to choose your eternal destination, you will have waited 1 second too long." Now, there's a lot of hope in that. And the hope is, if you have 1 or 2 seconds left, you can still cry out to Jesus and he will save you. And that's what the criminal on the cross next to him experienced. He was with Jesus in paradise that day, and I'm sure when he got there, he's looking around thinking, how in the world did I get here? Right? Are you sure you want me here in paradise, Jesus? Do you know what I've done? But that's the mercy of God. I'm going to fast forward because I do want to say one thing as we wrap it up here. And you can go through these other verses and these other points on your own. But mercy uses discretion. And I'm saying this as a counterbalance to everything that we've said. I'm not saying this to bring any confusion or contradiction to what we have said. And I know I'm clear in those areas because I'm just going to show you what the scriptures themselves say. But the point that we're making here is, even though there are times in God's plan when persecution and martyrdom are necessary, God warns His people how to respond around evil people who want to do harm. Because we can get this false notion of we're just supposed to be helping everybody, no matter who they are or what they've done or how bad their past. And a lot of times, by doing so, you can actually put yourself in harm's way. Paul says in Philippians chapter 1, verse 9, "It is my prayer that your love may abound more and more with knowledge and" what? "All discernment." Be aware of your surroundings. Be aware as much as you can with who you are working with. You can be surprised. That's why I don't like interviews, job interviews, because I've been on the hiring side of many job interviews, and this guy comes in and he's clean shaven and he's dressed sharply and he sounds like a great guy full of enthusiasm, and it's no different than a first date. And after the first date and after the honeymoon's over, you find out you married a monster. How people present themselves on that first date or in a hiring interview can be quite the deception. No, I'm not. I would never speak from my experience. It's been a cakewalk. Our honeymoon has never ended. It's let's see, Paul, that's how you. Yeah. I'm trying to teach Paul how to stay out of trouble in the pulpit.
I think you stepped in it big time.
Yeah. But there's got to be discernment. You have to be perceptive, right? Matthew chapter 7, verse 6, "Do not give dogs what is holy." This is Jesus talking, by the way. "Do not throw your pearls before pigs, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to" what? You know that happens? You don't give what is holy. You don't throw your pearls, your kindness, your time, your money, your strength, your effort to help them. Don't give that mercy away to a pig. Because pigs have a way of using it against you and attacking you. And we could go into a lot of circumstances, which I won't. But in Proverbs chapter 9, verse 7, it says, "Whoever corrects a scoffer gets himself abuse. He who reproves a wicked man incurs" what? "Injury." So don't do it. Do not reprove a scoffer. Mercy does use discretion. You can't help everyone. And there's some people that you should actually avoid instead of trying to help. Because there are some people that come back and bite you. Genesis chapter 19, verse 8, this is Lot. And remember, fire and brimstone, I can't talk this morning. Fire and brimstone is about to rain down on, thank you, Sodom and Gomorrah. Couldn't remember the name. How can you forget Sodom and Gomorrah? But anyway, you can, in your senior years, forget Sodom and Gomorrah. But so judgment is about to pour out on Sodom and Gomorrah. 2 angels show up at Lot's door. He brings them in. He's going to take care of them through the night. He's going to feed them. The angry mob sees these two strangers go into Lot's house, and they want to have some sexual pleasure with them. So what does Lot do? You know, I have a lot of trouble reading verse 8. As a father who has a daughter, I can't even imagine this. I think, Lot, are you insane? What? I don't know what was going on here. A different time, a different culture, you know, maybe that played into it. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Now we know about the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. Very homosexual. Why didn't Lot give himself? Why didn't Lot say, take me? Why would you give over your virgin daughters? I'm sorry, I just don't get this. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. And I understand Lot knew they were angels. The violent mob outside of his home didn't know they were angels. So, you know, Lot's doing the right thing by trying to protect them. But what's gone wrong in your brain where you're going to offer your daughters to them, to the mob? But they said, and they is this violent, evil mob, they said, stand back. They said, and they start to mock Lot. This fellow Lot came to sojourn, and now he's become our judge. Now, because you want to be our judge, Lot, we will deal worse with you than what we were even thinking of doing to them. You know, this is something that our current president does not understand. You don't negotiate with your enemy. You make your enemy afraid of you. That's how you deal with the situation. And I have to say, that's what President Trump was very good at. The way President Trump dealt with our dealings with Iran is exactly the way it should be dealt with. And you just pray to God that with this recent trip, President Biden hasn't undone all the good that was done. But anyway. But this is what happens when you try to negotiate with your enemies. You only make it worse. You're trying to be kind. You're trying to show them some mercy. And all they do is come right back and throw it in your face and attack you. Mercy uses discretion. Mercy is not so gullible to believe that everybody has a good heart. Paul in 2 Timothy said this, chapter 3, verse 1, but understand this, that in the last days there will come times of difficulty. Listen to some of these adjectives. For people will be lovers of self, lovers of money, proud, arrogant, what's the next word? Abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy. Look at these adjectives. Heartless. I can't imagine. Did you see that report where up in, I believe it was in New York City, I think it may have been Queens if I'm remembering right, a 12 and 14-year-old boy beat and killed a 73-year-old man in broad daylight. Heartless. How do you do that to someone? Unappeasable. You could offer them the world and it won't appease their hatred. Oh, they will take the world and then kill you next. You can't reason with them. They're unappeasable, slanderous, without self-control. They are brutal. Not loving good, treacherous, reckless, Perfect description of the culture that we're living in now. Swollen with conceit, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God. Some of them even claim to be Christians, having the appearance of godliness. And what does he say at the very end? What is his caution? Avoid such people. So mercy uses discretion. And there's some other verses that I'll let you read, but we're out of time for this morning. I'll let you read them on your own. Father, we thank you for your word to us. And Father, we thank you for the promise of that beatitude. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. When our heart within is moved and we feel that sympathy, that pity, and we don't just swallow it, we actually do something about it, and we're moved with that compassion, we're moved with that pity, God takes notice. When he was judging and separating the goats from the sheep, he knew of every kindness that sheep did towards his brethren, the Jews, during the tribulation. God knows your thoughts. He hears your words. He sees your actions. And there's coming a day when you will be rewarded for the mercy that you have shown to others. Isn't that great news? And remember the assumption, the conclusion, maybe I should say, that Jesus, was working off of, and that is this: if you consider yourself a Christian, you will be actively involved in the pain and suffering of others' lives. You will be ministering in some way. And Father, I thank you for this people here in this room and on Skype. Lord, I know, you know, how much they are involved in other people's lives, giving mercy, providing aid, providing finances when needed, being a friend, someone that can encourage along the way. Father, it's the mark, one of the marks of a Christian. And we see the level of priority that Jesus gives it by declaring that one day there's coming a judgment, and it will be based upon how you treat other people. Do you bring violence and hurt, or do you bring peace and healing? Father, help us to be servants of the Most High. Help us to be peaceable. Help us to be people who are actively involved in the needs of others. We thank you for this in Jesus' name. Amen.